Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Arohana podcast by the Ananta Centre. My name is Shaumik Roy. Please welcome my guest, Dr. Wijk, a professor at Leiden University, also my alma mater, also the director of the Hague Centre for Security Studies,
That's
and the
right.
founder.
Yep.
Thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate you coming out to India, making the long flight and coming and experiencing our event, the India EU Forum. So, Dr. Devik, I'd like to start by asking you about the possibility of the war in Ukraine ending in a ceasefire that perhaps may not be favorable to the EU. What happens then?
It could very well be the case that it is not favorable to the European Union or to NATO, which is more or less the same right now. So one of the issues is that the Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is requested by President Putin to hand over territory. So territory that has not been occupied yet by the Russians. Now, if this forced handing over of the territory occurs, that is not really very good for NATO and the European Union, because what happens then is that the Russians then gained a victory or a success. It's not really a victory, but a success without fighting for the rest of the Donbass. And the Donbass is the remaining part of. The Russians want to have this remaining part of the Donbass without fighting, and this is a reward for starting a war, and that is something we simply cannot accept in Europe. This is also the reason why in Europe quite a few people and politicians, but also people like me, are very much against an outcome. This war has to stop as soon as possible, but it can only stop along the lines which should be frozen. So that is probably one of the key issues here. Can we have a frozen line? Yes or no? Or do the Ukrainians have to hand over territory?
Frozen lines. Could it be the case that we end up with a frozen conflict in Europe, something like India and Pakistan, for
Oh yeah.
example?
Oh, that's very well. That's very possible. Yeah, because there's also a speciality of the Russians to create frozen conflicts. We've seen that in more places in Europe where they created a frozen conflict, and it could very well be the case that this will also happen to Ukraine.
If we end up with a ceasefire and a frozen conflict, and if that ceasefire, if the terms are not favorable to the Ukrainians and to NATO and to Europe, how does that impact Ukraine's position in negotiating its position within the EU?
If what you for example can do is that the remaining part of Ukraine will become member of the European Union. That could be a possibility. It's rather unusual, but we live in rather unusual times, so that is a possibility that something like that could happen.
The president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, has made some statements regarding Greenland.
Yeah.
What impact has that had on sort of European unity?
A hand grenade that was thrown into Europe. That is what happened. This is the wake-up call in a way we need it. We in Europe ignored numerous wake-up calls from the annexation of the Crimea in 2014 and many others. And now this one could not be ignored, because what happened here is that the Americans, by arguing that they want to have Greenland as part of the US, came in a situation where they started a conflict against our own allies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if this would have happened, then this would be the end of NATO. It would be the end of the transatlantic relations as we knew it for almost 80 years. And that would have huge repercussions. So finally, this didn't happen, but it's still on the table. If you look what President Trump has said, it's still on the table. He still could say, we need Greenland.
Yeah,
And
tomorrow he could wake up and say,
yeah, exactly. And if this is the case, then this would, in my view, lead to the collapse of NATO. But in a way, we already see a gradual erosion because of President Trump of NATO in Europe, and the explanation is quite simple. NATO was established based on the premise that that Europe was a vital interest to the US.
mm-hmm.
Now, if the Americans no longer consider the Europeans as a vital interest to the US, and this is the case right now, then it's over. Then what you then see is that the very foundation of NATO is eroded, and that means that transatlantic relations are redefined.
The White House released their national security document a while back, and that sort of did give the impression that this administration is very much focused on keeping the Americas within its sort of sphere of control.
Absolutely.
But it wasn't clear how it felt about, Western Europe, in the sense of, if there was a time when, if Article 5 was declared,
Yeah.
God forbid, would it come to Europe's aid? What?
I remember very well a NATO summit in 2018. I think it was 2018 in Brussels, and that was the first Trump administration. President Trump came to Brussels, and what happened then is that he almost blew up NATO.
Mm-hmm.
That was really a shock. Mm-hmm. A shock wave was sent throughout the alliance when that happened. Mm-hmm. I was in the room when it happened, and it's of course quite interesting to see what happened. Mm-hmm. But the Secretary General of NATO, Stoltenberg, in those days argued, well, this could be the end of NATO. So then there was already a big question mark put behind NATO. Now, if you now read the national security strategy, but also the national defense strategy in the US, then it's quite clear that the Europeans should take care of their own mm-hmm. Security, and there is much more than that. It's also a political, cultural thing, mm-hmm. Because the Americans now choose a side of the radical right in Europe. Mm-hmm. And that is not mainstream in Europe, so it's a niche in Europe, and that has huge implications, of course. Well, the possibility how to work together in the future, because the Americans, at least President Trump and his entourage, they simply don't care about mainstream Europe. Mm-hmm. That was already visible. Right after his inauguration, when Vice President Vance went to Germany, mm-hmm. That was the security conference of Munich, he declared that there's only one part of Europe that's okay, and that's radical right. Now that sent a shockwave through Germany, but also through other parts of Europe. And what happened then is, after that, this was confirmed by quite a few other documents. Mm-hmm. So from a cultural, political perspective, we are drifting apart. And the big question is how to deal with that.
Is there sort of a Hungary problem where one state can block, how do these divergent views on Russia, on NATO, on Trump affect European cohesion?
What we do right now in Europe, because the Hungary, for example, can block things, mm-hmm. but the European Union and the other states are now working around Hungary. So there is something going on. We simply cannot accept this anymore, where one country blocks everything. So what we do in Europe, and that's quite interesting because that is really new, is that we form ad hoc coalitions. We have ad hoc coalitions, a coalition of the willing for the support of Ukraine, for example. And that's a new way of moving forward. And there is also now a discussion going on among 6 member states to create this multi-speed Europe. And that has huge implications, of course, for the future of the European Union.
Ad hoc coalitions. We are sort of entering this age of issue-based diplomacy and issue-based alliances rather than complete alliances.
Yeah.
You know, that's sort of the way the world is now.
Yeah.
With that in mind, I want to ask you about China.
Yeah.
You know, are sort of how are China's interests in Europe affecting European security calculations? Are Chinese critical investments in infrastructure, are they causing worry in European governments? Are they causing worry in European societies?
The Belt and Road Initiative, which is quite impressive,
Of
I
course,
have to say.
Of course, but there are projects of the BRI within Europe. Also,
but
other
not
things.
that many.
Not that many.
Not that many.
Not that
And
many.
the Belt and Road Initiative, in a way, is a failure in Europe. Italy was the only major economy that that became member of this Belt and Road Initiative, but it's dead. So it simply doesn't work anymore. There is also this format with East European states about close political consultations with China. It's in a way it's also dead. So it simply doesn't work anymore.
But you know, for example, here in India, we took the decision to block TikTok quite long ago. TikTok is seen as a threat to our national security by the government. TikTok is quite spread out. It's widely adopted in Europe.
Absolutely.
That's also sort of the digital infrastructure that China exports.
I agree. We have to be careful. That's for sure. Yeah.
So do you think there could be a point where TikTok becomes the kind of discussion that it has been in India or the US with sort of congressional hearings?
It is already a discussion, especially if you talk about how can TikTok influence, for example, elections. So yes, there is already a discussion about it. But there is really a movement against too much influence of China in Europe. That means that we simply do not accept anymore all the foreign direct investments of China in Europe. We're not going to block them, but we are also not going to accept a selling out of Europe to other countries. So that something has changed over the last couple of years, months.
So it's kind of the FDI, Chinese FDI is kind of on ice in that sense. It's been frozen, really, but the trickles of the earlier investment continue.
Yes, you can say that. So we are not turning back the clock. So if investments were made, we accept them. But we are now having debates on the blocking of future investments. But it's not only about China. It's also about other countries.
Of course.
It's also about the US.
You mentioned sort of the effect on TikTok on elections and stuff.
Yeah.
How do you believe that European societies are sort of prepared for hybrid warfare, disinformation campaigns, cyber attacks? I mean, my time in the Netherlands, my time studying in the CSM program, there was constant discussion on these things.
Yeah.
But we were in the CSM program. You know, I don't think people on the streets in the Netherlands, in Den Haag, people doing a normal job, a bartender job or something like that, don't.
But it's changing. So over the last 12 months, something like that, we saw a big change. and that has to do with the situation in Ukraine, the constant hybrid operations by Russia in Europe, attacks on underwater cables, the disinformation campaigns, the arson. That's what we see all the time: attacks, sabotage. So we see that all the time, and also cyber operations. So people start to understand that something is going on and that they have to prepare. So that's exactly what is happening right now. And there is, of course, a link between what President Trump is doing, because people don't believe in the Article 5 guarantee anymore of America. So if this is the case, we are on our own, and then we should first deal with hybrid operations, and second, we should deal with the defense of the NATO territory. And it remains to be seen what kind of NATO we will have in the future. That could very well be a NATO without the US.
An interesting thought to leave this podcast on. I thank you very much for your time, Dr. De Wijk. And thank you so much for joining us. This is the Arohana podcast with Dr. De Wijk and Shaumik Roy at the India EU Forum 2026. Thank you.